So it's a new year, and you're thinking, how am I going to make this year different? How am I going to build something for myself? I'm dying to be my own boss or see if I can turn this business idea that I've been kicking around into a reality, but I don't know how to make it happen. Shopify is how you're going to make it happen, and let me tell you how. The best time to start your new business? Right now. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. Get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates, no coding or design skills required. All you need to do is drag and drop. Shopify makes it easy to manage your growing business. They help with the details like shipping, taxes, and payments from one single dashboard, allowing you to focus on the important stuff like growing your business. What happens if you don't act now? Will you regret it? What if someone beats you to the idea? Don't kick yourself when you hear this again in a year because you didn't do anything now. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/theathletic, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/theathletic to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/theathletic.
This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. Like many people, I've come into the new year full of hopes and aspirations for the next 12 months. Maybe, like me, you're anxiously pacing the floor waiting for the F1 season to begin, or perhaps you've set yourself a more regular fitness goal, like running your first marathon or commuting to work by bike. Whatever you plan to do in 2025, come into your own way with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Powered by Live Hydroscience, Liquid IV helps you break the mould. Liquid IV is so easy and convenient to tear, pour and enjoy, and it comes in several fantastic flavours, like their new Hydration Multiplier Sugar-Free Raspberry Lemonade and other winners like White Peach and Rainbow Sherbet. As a regular flyer, I know how easy it is to become dehydrated almost without knowing it when you're travelling. That's why I always take Liquid IV on overseas trips. It's more than just a drink, and it's scientifically formulated to hydrate better than water alone. Just one stick and 16 ounces of water provides 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 essential vitamins and nutrients. And what's more, it's always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code THERACE at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code THERACE at liquidiv.com.
Shop now at the Home Depot and get up to 35% off select appliances. Plus, save up to an extra $400 on select appliances like Frigidaire. From the stainless steel French door refrigerator with crisp steel drawers to keep produce fresh longer, to the 5-burner electric range that lets you cook more at once and get meals on the table faster. Right now, get up to 35% off select appliances like Frigidaire. The Home Depot. How doers get more done. Pricing valid January 9th through January 29th. U.S. only. See store online for details and minimum purchase required.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and after a year of waiting, Lewis Hamilton has finally tested a Ferrari F1 car for the first time as his preparations for the 2025 season started in earnest in Maranello. I'm Edd Straw, and joining us to talk through this momentous occasion and answer your questions about it are Scott Mitchell-Malm and Jonathan Noble. Well, John, lots to talk about, so we'll get straight into it. The buzz there's been surrounding Hamilton's visit to Ferrari this week, it's been immense, hasn't it? Have you ever seen anything like it?
Not for a while, actually. I think there's two aspects to it. I think, first of all, the mystery and intrigue about when this test was going to take place. Ferrari were never confirming anything. Everyone was throwing dates around. So it's kind of this big, would it be this day? Would it be this week? Would it be a bit later? Would the weather affect it? And I think that built up a sense of kind of excitement. Then Monday, bang, we had those photos of Lewis, which gathered a bit of attention. Everything pointed to today, and the Tifosi are out in full force today. You saw those images of them all parked on that overpass, looking over the track. Ferrari, a big day. Fred Vasseur was down at the test. Jerome Ambrosio looking down on the test. Everyone intrigued, everyone looking at it, and I thought it was really, really interesting that Ferrari's own press release at the end of the day likened this to similar circumstances to Michael Schumacher's first test there back in 1995. So I think there's quite a nice kind of insight into how big a moment Ferrari is looking at this?
Yeah, that comparison with Schumacher's first test at Fiorano in late '95 does spring to mind for me as the comparison. What did you make of it all, Scott?
Yeah, very big deal. One of those situations where the hype almost feels like it can't be matched by reality. And obviously the real reality comes in season once they're in competition and how Hamilton performs for Ferrari in the real thing. But for now, the reality was, what was it going to be like when he hit the track for the first time? Because cynically, I've seen some people refer to it as, people getting a lot of excited for a washed up driver driving a 2-year-old car. So what's there to care about? It's just so much more than that. It really is a new era starting. It's the most successful driver in F1 history and the most successful team in F1 history coming together for the first time. So it's a huge deal. And you said it at the top, Ed. We've had a year to look ahead to this, because it was so early in 2024 that Hamilton shocked the world with news of the move, and him in the car for the first time realises that there are no more crap Photoshop jobs of him in a red suit, no more trying to squeeze every last bit of a 44 mocked up onto a 2024 Ferrari. We've actually seen the real thing, so it's a big deal.
Yeah, we're certainly very appreciative of having more photos to illustrate stories and social media stuff and videos and that kind of thing about this. So, yeah, it is a big deal. In the grand scheme of things, it's not going to change the world, but it's the start of the actual real story of Hamilton at Ferrari. And I have to say, whenever you see a big driver move to Ferrari in particular, there is such a great impact in seeing it the first time in the car. I see Hamilton in the red overalls walking. So it'd be the same if, say, Max Verstappen was doing it, any of the real big names. But certainly a big day. But before we get into listener questions, Scott, shall we just run through what we know about what Hamilton's actually done at Maranello this week? We know he's driven the 2023 car, but what do we know about that run? What do we know about what else he's been up to?
Yeah, so it's his first week at Ferrari altogether. Monday was his first day. You saw the first photos of him in front of Enzo Ferrari's house at Fiorano, and then in the factory as well, meeting various people. Pretty powerful images, you'd have to say. They've when that first image of Hamilton at Ferrari landed, you knew it's probably going to be quite something. It wouldn't just be sort of a generic him shaking someone's hand at the front gate or something like that, would it? And it was very. It was very kind of symbolic of the size and nature of the moment. But it wasn't just a photo shoot for him. This week is getting down to business. So he's had a tour of Maranello. He's seen the layout of the factory, where all the important places are that he'll be. He's met with obviously the most senior people, so people like Fred Vasseur, John Elkann, Piero Ferrari. But he's also met team management, heads of departments. He's had initial meetings with the team. He's had a seat fit because he's driven the car now. He's driven the simulator as well. So all of that was kind of getting him geared up for the kind of, I would say, sort of run zero of 2025 for him, because there's not a huge amount that you can gain as a driver, like performance-wise or pace-wise, from a few laps at Fiorano, which is what he has done. He's done today. But it's all about kind of settling in and then making sure that you can really hit the ground running. Lewis said it himself at the end of the test that there's still a lot of work to do. But this was really just making sure that you kind of launched it in the right way. So even 30 laps of Fiorano, which is less than 100 kilometres, just helps him start to feel his way into life at Ferrari.
I don't know about you, John, but I think you could see that Hamilton was enjoying it. I mean, who wouldn't? Ultimately, it's Ferrari, but it is a unique team, isn't it? That whole location, Maranello, Fiorano, the Tifosi there camped out to watch him. You can't blame him for being a bit energised and excited by that. He's dreamt of being a Ferrari driver, and this is really, particularly today with the test, the official welcome to the whole place, both for those in the team and outside it.
Yeah, I think that you saw an enthusiasm from Lewis. Just the fact that he, lunchtime, he did his 30 laps back into the pits. The rain was coming in and threatening the rest of the day, but he drove down to the far corner of the circuit where the fans were and got out and waving to everybody. Now, I think it said an awful lot. So those photos there of his mum behind him taking pictures. So I think having his family there shows the significance of this moment. This you only ever get one first day driving a Ferrari. So I think the significance wasn't lost on him. He'd had the amazing day on the Monday, the photograph of him in the F40, Enzo Ferrari's house. So he was soaking all that up. But I'd love to know the kind of the proper emotions and what he was feeling last night and this morning, just anticipating that first drive in a Ferrari.
Well, he described it as being like his first F1 test all over again, didn't he? And he said it was one of the best feelings of his life. And I actually think that might be a rare occasion where quotes we've seen in the press release might have been close to or pretty much the real thing. I think we can take it at face value as well. Lewis is good at saying the right things in the right moment, especially when, it comes to paying homage to the fans and whatnot. But that you can also tell when he's being sincere, and I think what we've seen and heard from him so far, he is sincere, and I do feel he's energised by this. I said last year I think he needed to get out of Mercedes to prolong his F1 career because he wanted to carry on in Formula One, and I feel like at the moment it's a really, really good new environment. It's making him feel very special and making him feel very loved, and I can see him responding very well to that.
I'm sure as well that this will have been a week that's confirmed that there will be that energising effect to him, because you never really know. But going there, speaking to everyone, driving the car, I think it's got to have an effect. And I imagine that's probably given Hamilton quite a good feeling. You never know what's really going on inside. But yeah, Ferrari's a special team, and I'd agree he needed probably that reset as a 40-year-old driver, the new challenge, etc. And all credit to him for taking it on. I think regardless of how his Ferrari tenure goes, this first day will stay in his memory for a long time, because all Ferrari drivers say that. Carlos Sainz cited the first day he drove a Ferrari Formula One car at Fiorano as one of his best memories of his spell at Ferrari. So yeah, big day for F1, big day for Hamilton.
So it's a new year and you're thinking, how am I going to make this year different? How am I going to build something for myself? I'm dying to be my own boss or see if I can turn this business idea that I've been kicking around into a reality, but I don't know how to make it happen. Shopify is how you're going to make it happen, and let me tell you how. The best time to start your new business? Right now. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. Get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates, no coding or design skills required. All you need to do is drag and drop. Shopify makes it easy to manage your growing business. They help with the details like shipping, taxes, and payments from one single dashboard, allowing you to focus on the important stuff like growing your business. What happens if you don't act now? Will you regret it? What if someone beats you to the idea? Don't kick yourself when you hear this again in a year because you didn't do anything now. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/theathletic, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/theathletic to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/theathletic.
This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. Like many people, I've come into the new year full of hopes and aspirations for the next 12 months. Maybe, like me, you're anxiously pacing the floor waiting for the F1 season to begin, or perhaps you've set yourself a more regular fitness goal, like running your first marathon or commuting to work by bike. Whatever you plan to do in 2025, come into your own way with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Powered by Live Hydroscience, Liquid IV helps you break the mould. Liquid IV is so easy and convenient to tear, pour and enjoy, and it comes in several fantastic flavours, like their new Hydration Multiplier Sugar-Free Raspberry Lemonade, and other winners like White Peach and Rainbow Sherbet. As a regular flyer, I know how easy it is to become dehydrated almost without knowing it when you're travelling. That's why I always take Liquid IV on overseas trips. It's more than just a drink, and it's scientifically formulated to hydrate better than water alone. Just one stick and 16 ounces of water provides 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 essential vitamins and nutrients. And what's more, it's always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code THERACE at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code THERACE at liquidiv.com.
These are violent criminals, so they're not going to go down easy.
ABC Tuesdays.
Let's get this done.
The Rookie is back.
We have 2 new rookies starting today.
Howdy.
Being a cop is stressful 24/7. Every year on the job is different.
And Training Day.
We have a serial killer at large.
Never ends.
We need an ambulance!
The Rookie. All new Tuesdays on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Now let's get on to listener questions. If you're interested in gaining question asking privileges, you can join the Race Members Club via Patreon. That also gets you ad-free podcasts, our exclusive F1 Extra episodes, early access to videos and written articles and other exclusive content. Click the link in the episode description or head to Patreon and search for The Race or More. Right, first question for you, John, from Nikkei89. Why do the first test in Fiorano? Wouldn't some proper track be better for the test, or is Fiorano just for nostalgic reasons?
No, it's not nostalgia. It's practical reasons, basically. It's not. Today wasn't a test about performance. It wasn't about, Lewis Hamilton finding the limits of a Ferrari Formula One car and working out, am I going to be on pole position next year, or am I fighting for fourth place? Today was about, understanding systems, working with the engineers, understanding the team, getting his seating position sorted, understanding the steering controls, getting a feeling for the engine. These modern hybrid engines all have different performance characteristics. This is the first time that Lewis has driven a non-Mercedes power unit, so he needs to get used to that. He needs to know what the feel is like under the brakes, the feel generally of the car. How does it feel when DRS is open? All these little elements, just to get stuff processing in his head. Simulators these days are good, really good for helping with setup and getting a general feel, but they're not real life. You can't get the feelings that a driver gets from a real life car. So today was about ticking a few boxes off for Lewis, and then as we move towards what we expect to be a Barcelona test, then we'll start looking at performance and how a car performs when it's pushed a little bit harder.
And linked to that is the fact that at Fiorano, you can rack up a reasonable number of laps, like it is 30 laps, but you don't actually eat too much into your mileage limitation that you've got in the testing of previous cars rules for this year, which ironically, Ferrari played a big part in imposing for 2025 because they were one of the most vocal opponents of Red Bull testing Max Verstappen at Imola last year. And effectively, as a direct or indirect result of that, however you want to look at it, tighter restrictions on what we know as and what we'll call as TPC rules meant that there are now, I think, 4 days and 1,000 kilometres for your race drivers in 2025. It's very clear. You can tell from the way that they managed his laps at Fiorano and also some of the messaging around it as well. The priority will be maximising the running at Barcelona, I think. That might save some for later in the year, I'd imagine, too, just in case there's anything else that they need to get done or refine. But by doing it this way, it basically means that Lewis can kind of do a reasonable number of laps to get up to speed, not learning Fiorano as well. It's not the longest track in the world, but it's something for him to get used to. And if he's just going to start feeling things more, just the more times you go around, the better. So it just ticks a few boxes in practicality terms on that side, not just in terms of what he needed to work through in terms of the acclimatisation.
Question from Harry Shankar. My question is related to TPC running. So Hamilton running the 2023 car will familiarise him with the steering wheel and other changes like the power units. My question is, in sim running, how much input can drivers changing team provide? Say Lewis drives the 2024 car and provides a feedback for change for 2025. How valuable do you think that would be? Or should Lewis adapt himself to the current car alone and changes pertaining to that?
Well, there's kind of two parts to this. First of all, the core stuff on the 2025 car is now set. There's not a huge amount that can be done to change that. And given 2026 is on the horizon, teams will be minded to do as little as possible in changing their 2025 cars anyway. So while Hamilton might well have specific areas of feedback that he wants to give on the 25 car, like Charles Leclerc will, because it won't just be a carryover of last year's car, there'll be areas in which it's different. Ferrari will obviously take that on board, but there will be a limit to what they do. The bigger input, especially on the simulator side, will come in the work that they conduct for 2026. Further to that, the fact that Hamilton will have a period of adjustment before he gets fully up to speed and fully comfortable in the Ferrari means, I suspect, the outright kind of design changes, characteristic changes, that kind of thing, will still be more Leclerc-based for now because he's got the reference from last year. He's more in tune with everything. Ferrari will probably have a little bit more faith that he's getting at or near to 100% of the car in a moment, whereas it will take a little bit of time for Lewis to have that. Where I think it will be important is anything that he can bring where it's a notable difference for better or worse to Mercedes before and what they might be able to incorporate for 26. That's where it's going to be most significant for Lewis to be comfortable sharing his voice and for that voice to be listened to.
Next up, a question I'll take from Greg Eleftheriou. Hamilton had a famously unique grip on the top of the steering wheel at the start of races for Mercedes. Is this something we can see continuing at Ferrari, or is the clutch placement on the Ferrari wheel not conducive or necessary for this hand placement? And Ed R Gaming says, I heard Ferrari created a steering wheel with the buttons in the same position as Mercedes to assist Lewis's adjustments. Would this actually help him, as I would have thought Ferrari have different button combinations to Mercedes, so would this be a benefit to him? And would they look to revert to a standard Ferrari setup in the future? Well, I'm sure once he's in the proper car, the final wheel, I see no reason why Hamilton wouldn't have the clutch in the same place. He obviously wanted it there for sensitivity reasons. It's all electronic, so you can put anything anywhere on the wheel, so it's completely customizable. You see variations between two drivers in teams. So, yeah, unless he decides something else is better, I would presume he'll go to that, and Ferrari will adapt. Although everyone's got slightly different systems and that kind of thing, the basic suite of settings is the same. So I imagine he might well end up with something pretty similar to what he had at Mercedes, because it'll have developed a certain way. But also he might see some things Ferrari do and think, hey, actually, I quite like that. I'll try that. Yeah, that's good. So I imagine we might see something that's a bit of a halfway house. But I thought that clutch position with the distinctive hand over the back for the start, he does that for clutch feel, and I'm sure he'll ask for that again unless he's got a good reason not to. Next question for you, John, from Ben. As I was only 5 years old when Schumacher did his first test for Ferrari, was that similarly anticipated as this first test of Hamilton? I'd assume that today it's much more hyped because of the general attention F1 gets.
Well, he makes me feel old because I was out of university when Schumacher did his first test. I can't actually remember very much, but I think it was a different era. I think what I recall at the time was Schumacher's arrival was massive, and this was coming into a team that had been without a world championship for ages. Jean Todt was just starting to get things rolling. So it was viewed as a kind of breakthrough new chapter for Ferrari at the time. But what is different between then and now definitely is how F1's covered. You know, back then it was just newspapers, magazines. I'm not sure there were any websites back in those days at all, or if they were very, very, very basic. Whereas now, rolling news service, endless Instagram posts, social media, hype, podcasts, videos, everything. So I think it's a different gauge, but also a different media age, so which has made it much, much bigger now.
Yeah, I think back in the day, you'd see a photo in a magazine and it might be a few days later, or a newspaper report, or there might be a 2-minute segment on the news, and that was all you could get. Whereas now it can happen and you can get 80 people will post videos from trackside and the team will put stuff out. So, yeah, it's slightly changed. But I think the interest's still similar. It's just there's more to sustain it. So, yeah, very good reflection of the way the world's changed. Scott, a question from Alexander Law. I'm curious to know what you think the big operational differences will be for Lewis between Mercedes and Ferrari. Lewis is moving to a culturally different team, which will have their ways of working, like practice sessions, qualifying, race strategy management. What is noticeable from paddock interactions about the operational culture and differences that may be a challenge?
That's going to be fascinating to kind of observe, I think, because it's only when I think a top driver switches team that this kind of stuff is really noticeable. Because usually what we've seen is drivers come up from smaller teams and then they step into the big team, and what they notice obviously is that everything's sharper, everything's just that little bit more refined, everything's more organised, nothing's left to chance in the same way, and things are also more aggressive. You get less leeway on certain things. Conversely, if you've gone from a back of the grid team to a front of the grid team, you might find yourself suddenly only doing your Q1 run with 30 seconds left on the clock as you cross the line because you don't need to do a run before then, or something like that. With Hamilton, it's interesting. I suspect that it will be more about his own interactions with the team internally than it will be about the way that Ferrari goes about its business compared to Mercedes. There will definitely be differences. I would say it's maybe a little bit of a stereotype, and one that Fred Vasseur has been working to expunge from Ferrari. But a little bit of extra chaos inside Ferrari might not be too far away. But I think there were elements of Mercedes operations not quite being as sharp as they needed to be at times over the last 2 or 3 years. You know, look at on the pit stop side. I think they've admitted several times they ended up under-investing on that a few years ago and fell behind on things like pit stops. So he may well find some things are better than others, but I would put the emphasis more on Hamilton getting up to speed, working with people like his race engineer, Riccardo Adami, who was Carlos Sainz's engineer before, and Sebastian Vettel's race engineer before that. and making sure that he is as tightly knit with his team in the garage as possible. I think it'll be more about that kind of line of communication, because Hamilton had such a great bond, for example, with Peter Bonington, his race engineer at Mercedes, that just meant both could rely on the other. Both could kind of speak very bluntly to the other over the radio in the car, but also in the garage as well. And they kind of knew when it was time to overrule. And either it was Bono essentially finding a polite way to tell Hamilton to shut up and get on with it, or Hamilton going rogue and saying, no, this is the thing we're going to do. I know best because I'm in the car. It's going to take some time to refine that at Ferrari. So I do think that'll be the biggest change rather than a team-to-team cultural shift.
Yeah, and I suspect the language won't be quite as big a barrier as some might think, because English is the primary language they use for their engineering meetings and everything, although sometimes it's a bit of a battle to stop it breaking down into little Italian chats, apparently. So, but I think he will be okay on that, though he has said he'll try and take some Italian lessons. He may have been doing that over the past year. Right, a question from Chris Parrott. How useful is it for Ferrari to have its own private test track, and could you explain its configurations? Even in F1's unlimited testing pomp, I always thought the track looked unusually narrow and twisty, and not very representative of any track on the calendar then or now. Yeah, certainly, well, it's of limited use. They can't use it a huge amount. It's very useful for the company as a whole. They do all sorts of stuff there. So to have a track on your doorstep is extremely useful. And obviously the days when they do pushing 50 days of F1 testing there a year, like they would have done 20 years ago, have gone. Yes, it is narrow. It's not that quick. It's got one reasonably quick corner, and there's even that sort of more medium, and there's a fair few slow corners. There's a little bit of configuration adaptability, but not actually that much. There's an alternative first corner, but I think Hamilton and Leclerc, who also ran today, will have used the conventional one. If you go online, you can search, like YouTube's got a Raffaele Marcello good on-board lap. There's a Sebastian Vettel one as well, which will give you an idea for it. But Fiorano was great for this purpose, which is a driver just starting their process of feeling their way and getting it going again. It's okay for the drivers in the past at Ferrari when they've just wanted to use that to get their eye in because it's cheaper than going somewhere. But the meaningful testing will be done elsewhere. So, yeah, that's why you will see they limited how much running they used up for Hamilton, because you're restricted, as we said, on TPC running. So just use this to get a feel for the team and the people you're working with as much as the car. And the final question for this part, John, from Ranch Dingus. From speaking to other drivers, what's the hardest part of adapting to Ferrari and their ways?
I think in some sense this might be slightly overblown, that people thinking that Ferrari is a completely different world to other teams. I think moving to any team is always difficult, because you're meeting 1,000 new people. You need to understand who's important, who do you need to build relationships with, how do you get things done, where are the performance factors, who are the kind of real linchpins and everything. And that's a process that takes time. Whether if Lewis moved from Mercedes to McLaren or moved even to Alpine or somewhere, it's the same process you go through. It's no different. But I think there is an element of Ferrari being outside of F1's Silicon Valley, that it isn't just a move to down the road somewhere in Oxfordshire with a bunch of staff that you've worked with in the past. It's a new country, new cultures, new way of working. But I think Fred Vasseur has kind of tried to iron out a lot of the old problems of the past, changed the culture in the team. And I think Lewis, knowing Fred so well, having grown up through his career with Fred, will be a huge help in having it, just like with Jerome D'Ambrosio there, Loic Serra as well from Mercedes. There are familiar faces, and I think that rapidly accelerates your adaptation process, at least knowing some of the key figures in place.
And I suspect as well, the other big thing that drivers talk about is the hero worship of the drivers in Italy, for example. But Lewis Hamilton, he's been one of the biggest sporting stars on the planet for a very long time, so I suspect that'll feel fairly familiar to him, even if there's a bit more red around than in the past. Okay, on to our final batch of questions. John, a question from 928 Pilot. What's known about the backstory on why Lewis Hamilton has brought back Angela Cullen as his physio, or why she left in the first place? Curious if it was a team environment issue, but regardless, can you compare and contrast the team environments at Ferrari and Mercedes?
I think this is a little similar to my previous answer in terms of familiarity. That this is a new chapter for Lewis, new start, new learnings, everything, and I think he just needs this sense of familiarity. He and Angela, built an amazing relationship together. They left and parted and went their own ways on the best of terms. I don't think the reasons were ever properly explained. This may just been part of the process that Lewis went through after Abu Dhabi 21. So, reflecting a lot more on life. So I think bringing her back into the backroom personnel is just about building a team around him that he feels comfortable with, that he can work well with, and will help that adaptation into Italy, into Maranello and into Ferrari.
Scott, a question from Ben Kay. Do you guys see the hype and excitement behind this move and as a chance for Lewis to both get back to his best and tidy up the operational mishaps of Ferrari?
I don't know if it's targeted at operational mishaps as such. I think the evidence of last year, for example, would show that Ferrari's sort of continued to be on a good trajectory. Under Vasseur, it's not been. It's never a straight arrow upwards, but it's generally been better since Vasseur came in on that side. He's gradually shifted things around. From the very start, his first race as Ferrari team boss, there were slight changes within the race team and on the pit wall, for example. So I think that stuff has been refined in general. I think that the hype and excitement, to use Ben's terminology, simply comes with the high ceiling that such a partnership has. The idea that and let's be honest as well, that doesn't just extend to the on-track stuff, the competitive stuff. Ferrari and Hamilton are very excited about this, what it means off-track in terms of the commercial opportunities, the brand affiliations longer term, what kind of collaborations might be possible, where they can improve things. Because I do also think both Hamilton and Ferrari as a company are very committed to implementing proper D&I policies and actually making lasting change in terms of sustainability, diversity, inclusivity, and so on. So I think there is also a belief, and Ben alludes to this in the question, that it will be best for both parties. That Hamilton is in a stratosphere of driver that is so rare, that can only be good for Ferrari. And for Hamilton, like I said earlier, he needed to get out of Mercedes. He needed somewhere new, and there's only really Ferrari he could have gone to that could have matched his ambition and size and the sort of challenge that he's after. So I think that's a very mutually beneficial arrangement there. It's maybe a slightly bigger question mark on Ferrari's side than Hamilton's side. I can well imagine that Hamilton gets a bit more out of this in competitive terms and everything than Ferrari might, if Hamilton still has some lingering ground effect car incompatibilities or whatever. But I just think with his experience and stature, Ferrari's also, even if Lewis isn't quite on Leclerc's level, Ferrari's still going to get a lot out of him. Whether it's more than they would have got competitively out of Carlos Sainz is an entirely other discussion that we'll probably have at some point this year if it looks like Lewis is struggling.
Next question I'll take from Ollie Barker. With Leclerc being the incumbent driver, how will Ferrari approach car development with Hamilton joining the team? Will they take the Red Bull approach and fully favour one driver, i.e. Leclerc, or will they work equally with both? I think in this it will be equally with both. You have to remember the Red Bull thing is about, as we've spoken about before, Verstappen's tolerance for a faster but trickier car style and set of car characteristics, the pointy style. And that kind of naturally goes there. It's not a conscious thing. Verstappen's ceiling is a lot higher than Perez's was, so you naturally go that way. Hamilton and Leclerc, as we'll talk about in a minute, they don't have diametrically opposed demands in terms of the car and driving style. Everyone's got slightly different ones, but they're closer together than such extremes. They'll work equally with both. I don't think there's any particular reason why they wouldn't. Most drivers want a similar selection of things, and it's in the fine detail. Leclerc being the incumbent, inevitably they kind of will be taking their lead from him at the moment because he's got all that background and context. But you can ultimately take the feedback on board and work with both drivers equally. There may be a point where one or the other gets the upper hand and then things can change, but I don't think Ferrari's going into it with any preconceptions of it, and you don't necessarily need to disproportionately favour one driver over the other in terms of the way you work with them. Right, now a question from David Tripler. I'm going to pass this one over to Mark Hughes, who couldn't join us for the full podcast but has recorded an answer. How do Hamilton and Leclerc's driving styles compare? Are there certain characteristics of the Ferrari that could favour one over the other?
Yeah, they have a slightly different way of working the car on corner entry, but a similarity in the car trait which works best to facilitate those preferences. So Leclerc is a great one for overlapping the throttle on the brake, balancing one against the other to adjust the line on corner entry to get the car rotated earlier than it naturally wants to. Very high energy in this phase of the corner. His limbs are doing different things, beautifully coordinated. A car which responds best to this will have a natural oversteer, which then tends to carry through the rest of the corner. Leclerc's very relaxed about that, can drive the car in a very extrovert way through those slow corners, and you see this to really devastating effect at Monaco and Baku, where he's quite untouchable. You'll have the whole car sliding in harmony with the rear balance and oversteer as a result of what he's induced upon corner entry. Hamilton's advantage has tended in the past to come from how he can so exquisitely judge super hard braking with the initial turn-in, using the weight transfer of the braking to stand the car on its nose, but then come off just as the lateral load is beginning in a way that gives him the rotation that Leclerc gets through overlapping the throttle. Hamilton uses the weight transfer of the braking more. He'll then only tend to overlap the throttle if the car still isn't responding enough, if he's still not getting enough rotation. So Ferraris of the last 3 or 4 years, they've traditionally had this natural slight oversteer balance into slow turns, and Leclerc has been great at exploiting that. That same trait should also suit Hamilton, I think, but with the proviso that it might not be enough. This generation of ground effect car really doesn't change direction very well into slow corners, and the hazard of relying heavily on braking to move the centre of aero forward very suddenly is that it will move back again very suddenly as you release the brakes, potentially giving you mid-corner understeer. But I think that the Ferrari of the last few years limit that trait better than any other, certainly better than the Mercedes that Hamilton drove last year. So I think that's mainly why the Ferraris have always been the quickest into and through slow corners. So I'd be optimistic that this the car will work for both of them, even though their styles are slightly different.
Great stuff as always there from Mark Hughes. John, a question now for you from Jan Alexander. We all know Leclerc is quick and he's got years of experience with the team, so it's not impossible he'll be significantly better than Hamilton for most of 2025. If that happens, do you think Hamilton will call it a day at the end of 2025? And if so, where do Ferrari turn next? Behrman, if he does well at Haas?
I think it depends. If say Leclerc is 2-3 tenths quicker consistently and Lewis isn't on a par in the races, I think it depends what's the explanation for that gap is. I think that the difficulty Lewis had at Mercedes was there was no obvious explanation in his head as to why he was struggling with his car against George. It didn't make sense in his head. He started doubting himself, and that led to a spiral where in Qatar he said, "I'm not fast anymore." But if there are explanations, if there's an understanding, if it's about adapting to the car, if it's about getting more feel, leading direction to 26, I think Lewis has still got the fight in him, has still got the belief that he can do it. You're heading into new regulations in 26. He'll have a year's experience under his head. So I would be very surprised if Leclerc is quicker, that Lewis says, "Oh, no, I can't do this, I'm walking." I think he sees more in it. He's invigorated and can plot a path out. But I think on the Behrman point, we saw Ayao Komatsu at Haas earlier on this week was talking about Oliver and just how hugely impressed he is with him. He's going to see Ferrari next week just to discuss what kind of reports and feedback they want on Oliver's progress. And Ayao was absolutely adamant that Ferrari are not going to be able to ignore what Behrman does in that car over the next 2 years. So I think Behrman is on the list of candidates for a Ferrari seat further down the road.
Next up, Scott, a question for you from Yanis. From what race on will we be expecting Hamilton to be comfortable in the Ferrari, and can we truly criticise his performance?
Oh, criticise?
On the exact race, Scott.
That's
please.
a loaded question. If ever I've heard
what
one.
race?
I'm going to turn criticise into scrutinise for my own benefit. I don't really fancy taking on the combined might of the Tifosi and Team LH at the first go. I'll leave that for later in the season. I would say there's no way he's going to be at 100% for the first race of the year. I just don't think any driver would be. Formula One's too competitive, and I think if he's within 2 tenths of Leclerc in qualifying in Australia, I think that would genuinely be a good job. With whatever what will. He'll probably have the lion's share of whatever 2023 car testing they do, obviously Fiorano and then Barcelona at the end of the month, but then he's got 1.5 days. I'd be stunned if Ferrari only give Leclerc 1 day in the 25 car. So I'd imagine that Lewis will only have a day and a half in the car in Bahrain. unlike previous years, Bahrain's not the season opener, so you don't have the roll in to the first race at the same track. Because if they'd had that, I'd suggest that you could scrutinise Lewis's performance in Bahrain as a one-off thing. I think you then need to take a step back and give him a few more races to look elsewhere. But Bahrain would have given you a really good one. So with that in mind, I would say that the first few flyaways are a sensible reference. But if you go on the fact that Bahrain's obviously still early in the season, I think by the time we've done Saudi, which is round 5, because I think Bahrain's in the middle of the triple header, isn't it? I think that's a reasonable amount of time, especially with the fact that Bahrain is in there as race 4, because then you go back to the place where you went pre-season testing, so it's a sort of familiar venue. So I would say 4 or 5 races is a good time. I still don't think then you'll see the best of Hamilton in a Ferrari, but you'll know enough, and he'll have had enough time to see how the adaptation's going. And I think that's the first real point of scrutiny.
Next up, a question from Castrol that I'll take. What's your views on how much of a mental shift it will be for long-tenured Ferrari employees to throw their support behind Hamilton, considering over his career, but particularly in the hybrid era, he has essentially been their enemy number one? Clearly, Ferrari recognise his ability as they've hired him, but is this likely to impact his eternal support versus Leclerc? I don't think it'll be much of a mental shift at all, to be honest. You may get the odd individual, but I don't think people who work in F1 teams really think like that. It's not like you're the arch enemy. Yeah, when you're racing them, you're the enemy, but I doubt there's any particularly deep-rooted hatreds. I think he'll just come in as another driver insofar as you would treat any driver like that, and probably it'll be even more accelerated by the fact they'll have so much respect for him and be fascinated to know what it's like to work with him. So I don't think there'll be any particular problem. Leclerc obviously is incumbent. If you're the incumbent driver who's been there for years, you do have that history there. So it takes time to catch up on that, and Hamilton might never catch up on that because Leclerc has been involved there for so long. But I don't think it's going to be particularly a problem. I think they'll be right behind Hamilton right from the off. Right, the next question, John, from Alex Morris. Do you genuinely see this working for Hamilton? There's no denying his brilliance, but he's 40 and up against Charles Leclerc at 27, entering his peak years. I can see him bagging wins, but expect Leclerc to be faster most of the time.
I think it's too early to say yes or no, it will or won't work. But I think what we can say for definite is it could work. I think he's reinvigorated by Ferrari. I think the change of team, the change of atmosphere, feeling completely loved and at one and being wanted again in a new environment has lifted his spirits. And if he's given a car that suits his driving style, if he's given a car that can fight at the front, then I think there's a chance to make it work. Leclerc's going to be super tough. Leclerc's driving brilliantly. Is a championship contender this year if Ferrari's car's good enough. He's on it in qualifying. He can deliver the consistency that's needed on Sundays if needed. And I think Lewis, he is still fast. We saw in Vegas, for example, just a short time after that we had Qatar and Lewis doubting himself and I'm not fast anymore. But Fred Vasseur was instantly straight away when asked, "Are you concerned about Lewis?" He says, "No, I know exactly what he can do." So we know what Lewis can do. This can work, but I think it's too early to say it's a definite yes, it is going to work.
Michael Holden, next with a question for you, Scott. My question calls for speculation. How will Lewis's stint at Ferrari impact on his legacy, regardless if his time there proves to be a success or if it becomes a damp squib?
That's a very, very good question. I would say that it should enhance the legacy because it just moves him out of that Mercedes environment. It's a legendary combination. And I do think it'll work. I do think he'll have success there. And I don't think he needs to batter Leclerc or anything. I think he might even survive being narrowly shaded by Leclerc. And it would still be something that enhances his legacy. A driver goes to another team at 40 years old at the end of his career into the team where, Leclerc's been the favourite son for so many years. And Leclerc is an outstanding driver. By rights, and history would tell you that Hamilton shouldn't be anywhere near that. So I think you do need to have a little bit of perspective when you judge these things. But if he gets badly beaten by Leclerc, I would say the kind of negative sentiment that crept in through that 3 years at Mercedes alongside George Russell would probably be more cemented. certainly the people that take that view that Russell outshone Hamilton at Mercedes and therefore that reflects badly on Lewis would feel validated to have that position if it then repeats itself with Leclerc at Ferrari. But let's say, worst case scenario is he gets absolutely destroyed this year and thinks, I can't do this anymore. I'm not going through this again. I don't think the new rules will help me. Behrman has an absolute stunner at Haas and Lewis decides I'm going to walk away. That's the absolute worst case scenario, I think. I still think that'll be a sad footnote on the career. But when you look back and speak about Lewis Hamilton in 10 years' time, which I think is a good way to judge the legacy, you're not going to go, oh, Lewis Hamilton, remember that crap final year he had at Ferrari? It'll be Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion. That'll be the way that'll be the shorthand version of referring to him. So in that sense, I think it would need to be a more protracted, drawn-out problem, a lack of performance or whatever, for it to have any kind of sort of meaningful impact.
But I think if that worst case scenario happens, I think the analysis at the end of it will still be, did this rule set ground effect era actually hurt what Hamilton could deliver? Was this a rules era that didn't suit him and ultimately forced him aside, rather than it being a decline in himself? If we had the old rule set, would performances have been better? I think that would be the big uncertainty that would be carried through afterwards.
Next up, a question I'll take from Sam Mallinson. If Hamilton is close or even beats Leclerc in 2025, how will that impact on Leclerc and Russell's respective reputations and futures? Well, if he's close or beats Leclerc in 25, that definitely enhances Russell's reputation across the board, given how well Russell performed compared to Hamilton, because he was the stronger driver by a reasonable margin last year, and even in the previous 2 years when it was closer, he was right there with him. In terms of Leclerc, well, if Leclerc beats Hamilton and Hamilton's close, I think that enhances Leclerc's reputation. Hamilton's still a great driver. If Leclerc gets beaten by Hamilton, clearly then I think that may take a little bit of the shine off Leclerc. It'll drop him down probably a few places in terms of people being excited about him being a future champion. But I can't see Hamilton beating him comfortably, if you like. I mean, when we're talking about beating or close, we're talking about the overall performance level. You can have a few points here or there that's just down to the way things go. But yeah, I think whatever happens is probably pretty good for Russell. But if Leclerc gets beaten by Hamilton, he won't be delighted with that because he will see himself as the main man and the future. But could happen. John, a question for you now from Andre Pereira. Let's assume that Hamilton gets either destroyed by Charles or is completely dominated. How is Ferrari prepared to handle both drivers in those extreme situations? And if they have a competitive car while Charles is going for the championship and Hamilton is struggling, will they be ready to turn Hamilton into the number 2 driver, or will they be willing to sacrifice the Drivers' Championship to avoid having a favourite driver?
I don't think they will be preparing for that scenario at all. I think they've signed Lewis because they believe in him. They believe he's still quick enough. They believe he can win races and fight for the championship. We've seen Lewis, when the car suits him, especially on race days, he can still drive brilliantly. And that will be all Ferrari will be focused on, will be about lifting performance. It won't be having crisis meetings, thinking now, what are we going to do if Lewis isn't quick enough? But I think if there was a scenario where Charles was well ahead in the championship, Lewis was out of contention, I think Lewis is old enough, wise enough and smart enough to probably put his hand up himself and say, I'm going to play a supporting role here because helping Ferrari win a championship would still mean something for him. He's not a youngster, fighting to make his reputation and pushing on. He sees bigger picture. He knows bigger picture. So I think it's something that he would more readily accept than some other young drivers have in the recent past.
Next up for you, Scott, a question from Steve D. Any driver going to a new team is going to say they are there to win the World Championship, but what's the minimum outcome that Lewis should realistically target based on him being new to the team and bearing in mind Ferrari's recent performance levels?
I think he needs to be a good percentage of whatever Leclerc's able to achieve in the car. So let's say that the Ferrari's good enough to win the World Championship. Hamilton will be disappointed if he doesn't fight for the title. But in that situation, you're looking at, okay, he needs to be, should we say, 80, 85% of Leclerc's points, really, fighting for top 3 in the championship. I wouldn't expect him to be at a Sergio Perez level to Max Verstappen last year. That would be very, very, very far short of doing a good enough job. If the car's not quite good enough to fight for a title but can win races, you'd expect Hamilton to aim for a victory over the course of the season. It's basically whatever the car's capable of. I think Leclerc should hit that this year. If that car's capable of fighting for the title, I think Leclerc should fight for a title. I think it's a little bit too soon to ask of that of Hamilton, because he's just going to be on the back foot at the start of the year, and that level is so high at the front at the moment. That'll be tricky. And I just think it's all kind of geared towards a 2026 push, but could be wrong. Maybe he'll gel really, really quickly and we'll see the best of Hamilton right away. I would say, coming back to my answer to a previous question about when you can start to scrutinise him or criticise him as the question specified, I think if you're saying the first 4 or 5 races are the reference, that's the point where you say what's going to look good for Lewis this year. Because if he comes out of those first 4 or 5 races comfortable in the car, comfortable in the team, really, really on it, qualifying quite well, then I think the rest of the season he should be aiming to do what Leclerc does.
And the final question that I'll take from Davey Cullen. Based on your insights into Ferrari's operations and general approach to performance under Fred Vasseurs' watch, how far do you think the team will go to accommodate Lewis, who as a seasoned champion may not be as adaptable as a rookie and expects certain things from his team and car, even if that would mean compromising on pure performance? I'm sure they'll approach him in pretty much the same way as most drivers. Yeah, it's right. If he was a rookie or inexperienced, it tends to be, right, you do things the way we want to, but you're teaching a driver who doesn't have such clear ideas. Whereas with an experienced one, you integrate them into the way the team works. You say, right, what do you want? What do you want to get in terms of the balance of the car, the feel, etc.? You work with them normally. I don't think they're going to sacrifice loads of performance to give him a car balance that he wants, but they will find, as they do with every driver, the best overall net performance. And I don't think it'll be especially different. Hamilton will have some very clear ideas. Vasseur will know how to treat him. And a driver of Hamilton's status has a certain amount of credibility, and they do expect to be listened to when they go there. But it's a collaborative process, and I don't think that there'll be any particular compromise there. It'll be the same way they would work with any driver who comes in with good experience that they hold in very high regard. Well, thanks very much for the questions. Thanks to John and Scott for the answers. I'm sure we're going to be talking about Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari a huge amount this year. This is just the start, but hopefully everybody enjoyed our thoughts on the day of his first test. And with the season rapidly approaching, stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.
Hello, I'm Ian McIntosh and I'm the host of the Daily Football Briefing. What is the Daily Football Briefing? It's a special 10-minute daily show designed to bring you up to speed with the most important stories from across the football world. Except on Monday mornings when it's 15 minutes and we try to cram in the results, standings and stories from the top 10 leagues on the planet. Or at least the top 10 leagues that I run on a Football Manager save. Follow this show today and you'll never miss another big story again, whether it's news that The Athletic has just broken. David Ornstein, what happened? News from outside the Premier League that other podcasts might ignore.
That is a difficult one to explain, so let's go bit by bit.
Or it's Champions League week and you just need someone to put it all into context.
It's made for a very useful away point in a difficult game in a difficult week.
Listen to the Daily Football Briefing in 2025. It's out every weekday wherever you get your podcasts.